My name is Claire Bellamy. I am 41 years old, and at 9:22 on a Thursday morning, I heard my father say, Claire was never going to amount to anything worth protecting the house for anyway, just sign the transfer to Marcus and we'll backdate it before she notices. To my brother, in the kitchen of the house I had been paying the mortgage on for 11 years, while they believed I was 40 minutes away dropping my daughter off at school. I was standing in the hallway, just past the coat closet. I had come back because Lily forgot her inhaler. The front door was unlocked, it always was, because I was the one who paid for the lock replacement, and I was the one who kept a spare key on a carabiner clipped to my purse. I could smell the particular staleness of morning coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long, that slightly scorched, almost metallic note. My hand was on the inhaler in my jacket pocket, my fingers closed around it slowly. My feet did not move, my breathing did not change. Something behind my eyes went perfectly flat, the way a surveying level settles into true horizontal, and I stood there and I listened to every single word they said for the next 4 minutes and 30 seconds. I know the duration because I looked at my phone when it started, and I looked at my phone when it ended. That is what I do. I measure things. I am a licensed land surveyor and geographic information systems analyst. I have spent 19 years establishing precise boundaries, property lines, easement corridors, setback distances, floodplain elevations. My hands know the weight of a total station before my mind registers I have picked one up. My eyes catch discrepancies in parcel descriptions the way most people catch a misspelled name. When someone tells me a boundary is about here, something in me goes still and cold, because about is the word that precedes every property dispute I have ever been hired to resolve. That skill had drawn legal boundaries for county governments, developers, and estate attorneys for nearly 2 decades. It was about to draw the real boundary inside my own family. I stayed perfectly still for what felt like a very long time after those words. Before I tell you what I decided in that stillness, tell me, what time is it where you are? Because I remember exactly what time it was the morning everything changed. Some moments burn the clock into your memory. There was one more thing said in that kitchen. My brother asked, "What about the tax basis?" And my father said a number, a specific number. I will come back to that number. First, let me tell you how long this had been happening. My father, Gerald Bellamy, bought the house at 414 Rue Colline in Thibodaux, Louisiana, in 1987. He paid $62,000 for it. It was a raised Creole cottage on 2.5 acres with a detached garage and a pecan orchard that hadn't been properly maintained in a decade. He was 34. My mother was alive. Marcus was 6. I was 2. The house was never grand, not then, but it sat on a ridge that didn't flood, which in Thibodaux means something. My mother died when I was 9, ovarian cancer. What I remember most is not the funeral, but the Tuesday after, when my father sat at the kitchen table with a stack of envelopes and said, without looking at either of us, "Your mother handled this part. I don't know what half of these are." Marcus, who was 13, got up and left the room. I sat down across from my father and started sorting the envelopes by return address. I was 9 years old, and I was already the one organizing the information. By the time I was 16, I was paying the utility bills from my after-school job at the hardware store. Not because my father asked, because I came home one February and the gas had been shut off, and Marcus was at a friend's house where there was heat, and my father was asleep under 3 blankets with a bottle of Jim Beam on the nightstand. I called the gas company, gave them my debit card number, and wrote the confirmation number on the back of an envelope. That was the beginning of a system, not a family system, an extraction system. Every year, something new was added to my column. The roof leaked in 1999. I was 15. I paid a roofer's helper to patch it because I couldn't afford the full job, and I climbed up and tarred the seams myself. The septic tank failed in 2003. I was 19, just starting my surveying coursework at Nichols State, and I took out my first credit card to cover the pumping and the lateral line repair, $4,200 at 19% interest. I still remember the number because I still remember every number. The driveway cracked and sank in 2006. The east side gallery posts rotted in 2008. The electrical panel was condemned by the parish inspector in 2010. Every time, the call came to me. Not to Marcus, never to Marcus. Marcus, during these years, was living in Baton Rouge, then New Orleans, then Houston. He worked in pharmaceutical sales. He drove a leased Audi. He came home for Thanksgiving and sometimes Christmas, where he would sit on the gallery I had repaired and drink beer and say things like, "This old place has good bones." He never once asked what the bones cost to keep standing. My father, during these years, settled into a particular posture toward me that I did not have a word for until much later. It was not gratitude, it was not expectation, it was entitlement wearing the costume of helplessness. He would call and describe a problem, the water heater, the termite damage, the insurance premium, and then go silent, and the silence was the request. I filled every silence with a check. In 2013, I was 29. I had my professional surveyor's license. I was earning solid money. My father called and said the bank was threatening foreclosure. He was 11 months behind on the mortgage. The amount owed was $34,200. I refinanced the entire mortgage into my name. I qualified because of my income and credit score. The house, however, remained in my father's name on the deed. He told me he would add me to the title once things settled down. Things never settled down. That phrase was a door that never opened, and I walked past it every month when I made the $1,140 payment. The irony is that I am literally a person whose profession is drawing boundaries. I have stood in courtrooms and testified about where one person's land ends and another person's begins. I have told grown men that the fence they built is 14 inches over the property line and that precision matters. And I went home every month and made a mortgage payment on a house with my name nowhere on the deed, and I called that love. Between 2013 and 2024, I paid approximately $150,480 in mortgage payments. I paid an additional $87,000 in repairs, improvements, and property taxes. I replaced the entire roof in 2017 for $23,000. I rebuilt the kitchen in 2019 for $31,000. I installed central air for the first time in the house's history in 2021 for $14,500. The house that my father bought for $62,000 in 1987 was, by 2024, appraised at $485,000. 90% of that value increase existed because of my labor and my money. The morning I stood in the hallway and heard my father tell my brother to backdate a property transfer, I had already made that month's mortgage payment 3 days earlier, $1,240, deducted automatically. So here is what I did next. I did not confront them. I walked back down the hallway. I opened and closed the front door loudly, as though I had just arrived. I called out, "Lily forgot her inhaler, just grabbing it." I heard the kitchen conversation stop. My father appeared in the doorway and said, "Morning, Claire Bear." I said, "Morning, Dad." I handed nothing to anyone. I drove back to the school and delivered the inhaler to the front office and sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes. Then I started looking. The first thing I checked was the parish assessor's records. I have access to the Geographic Information Systems database for Lafourche Parish as part of my professional work. I pulled up parcel number 0714-0033, 414 Rue Colline. Owner of record, Gerald R. Bellamy. No changes filed, not yet. But I also pulled the conveyance records for the past 60 days, nothing. Which meant the transfer hadn't happened yet. What I heard was the planning stage. The second thing I did was pull the property's full chain of title from the Clerk of Court's digital archive. I traced every conveyance, every mortgage, every lien, every servitude back to 1987. What I found was my own name. Specifically, my name was on the mortgage as the borrower since the 2013 refinance. The note was in my name. The deed of trust was in my name. But the deed, the ownership document, listed only Gerald R. Bellamy. My father had agreed to a quitclaim deed adding me in 2013. It was referenced in the closing documents. It was never recorded. I found the unrecorded quitclaim in the closing file at the title company where I had refinanced. It had my father's signature. It had a notary stamp. It had never been filed with the clerk of court. Someone had simply never submitted it. I called the title company. I identified myself and referenced the file number. The title officer who had handled the closing had retired, but the current manager located the file. she confirmed. The quitclaim deed was executed, notarized, and never recorded. When I asked why, she said, "It looks like the original was given to the borrower's family member to file. We have a note here. Original deed given to Gerald Bellamy for recording. He told us he'd handle it himself. He told them he would handle it himself. He held a signed, notarized deed that would have given me legal ownership of half the house I was paying for. And he put it in a drawer and never filed it." I sat in my truck outside the title company's office and stared at the dashboard. My hands were on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, exactly where they rest when I am shooting a property line and waiting for the instrument to level. Something inside me was running calculations I had not asked it to run. 11 years of payments, 87,000 in repairs, a quitclaim deed in a drawer, a kitchen conversation about backdating a transfer to my brother. The math was simple. The math was always simple. It was the story around the math that people made complicated. I spent the next 3 weeks building what I now think of as the survey file. Not a legal case, a survey. Because that is what I know how to do. I establish what is where, and I document it so precisely that no one can argue with the coordinates. I obtained certified copies of every check I had written for the property, every wire transfer, every credit card statement connected to a contractor or a material supplier. I organized them by year. The total was $237,480. I retrieved the unrecorded quitclaim deed from the title company. They provided a certified copy, my father's signature, the notary seal dated June 14, 2013, the legal description of the property matching parcel 0714-0033 to the inch. I pulled the mortgage servicing records showing every payment I had made since 2013. 131 consecutive payments, not one missed, not one late. I obtained the property tax receipts for the last 11 years from the parish tax collector, every single one paid by check or electronic transfer from my bank account. My name, my account number, every year. Then I looked at what my father and brother were planning. I found the transfer document, not the one they were going to use, the draft. Marcus had emailed it to my father. I knew this because my father's email was connected to the household computer in the study, the computer I had bought him in 2020, set up and maintained. The email was open on the desktop when I went in to update his antivirus software, which I also paid for. I did not search for it. It was simply there, the way evidence often is when people do not believe they are being watched. The draft was an act of donation, a Louisiana conveyance instrument transferring the property from Gerald R. Bellamy to Marcus J. Bellamy for love and affection and other valuable consideration. The document was prepared by an attorney in Baton Rouge I did not recognize. The draft was dated 3 weeks before the kitchen conversation I overheard, and the valuable consideration line included a notation: donor acknowledges no outstanding liens or encumbrances on the property. No outstanding liens or encumbrances, my mortgage, my deed of trust, 131 payments. The document stated they did not exist. That was the almost correct flaw. The act of donation was properly formatted. The legal description was accurate. I checked it against the survey plat I had in my own professional files, because I had surveyed this property myself in 2017 when the neighbor disputed the fence line. The notary block was correct. The witness lines were correct. But the lien certification was false. There was a $94,000 remaining mortgage balance on that property, in my name, secured by a deed of trust recorded with the Lafourche Parish Clerk of Court. Anyone who pulled a title search would find it in 11 seconds. Which meant either the Baton Rouge attorney had not run a title search, or he had been told there was no mortgage. I called the attorney's office. I identified myself as a licensed surveyor who had performed work on the property and had a professional interest in the title status. I asked if a title search had been performed in connection with a pending conveyance. The paralegal said, the client indicated the property was free and clear. We prepared the document based on client representation. Client representation. My father told them there was no mortgage. My brother, who has a business degree and sells pharmaceuticals and drives a leased car he replaces every 36 months, never checked. And that number my father quoted in the kitchen, the tax basis. He told Marcus the property's tax basis was $62,000, the original purchase price, as though nothing I had put into it existed. as though $237,480 was air. My father hosted a family gathering every year on the first Saturday of November. He called it the Bellamy Open House. He had been doing it since 2015, the year after I finished the major renovations. Before that, the house was not in condition to host anything. After I rebuilt the kitchen and fixed the plumbing and installed the air conditioning and re-roofed the structure, my father began inviting 30 to 40 people to admire it. He would stand on the front gallery, the gallery I had reposted and rescreened and refloored, and accept compliments. Neighbors, old friends, Marcus's colleagues when they were in town. My father would gesture at the kitchen and say, "I've been working on this old place my whole life." He never once said my name in connection with any of it. The 2024 open house was scheduled for November 2nd. The act of donation was dated to be signed November 4th. They were going to throw the party in my house and transfer it 2 days later. I let the party happen. I brought Lily. I brought a dish, smothered okra, my mother's recipe that I was the only one who still made because I was the only one who had written it down. I set it on the counter of the kitchen I had paid $31,000 to build. My father said, "Claire Bear, your okra's the only reason half these people show up." I said, "Thank you, Dad," and I invited one additional guest. I did not tell my father. A woman named Renee Trosclair. Renee was a title attorney who had handled closings in Lafourche Parish for 22 years. She was not my attorney. I had not retained her. She was a professional acquaintance. We had worked together on boundary disputes. I told her, over coffee the week before, what I had found. I showed her the unrecorded quitclaim deed, the mortgage records, and the draft act of donation with the false lien certification. She set her coffee down and said, "Claire, do you understand what this is?" I said, "I understand exactly what this is." She said, "I'd like to be there." I said, "I was hoping you would." Renee arrived at the open house in a gray blazer and spoke to no one in particular for the first hour. She complimented the pecan pie. She admired the gallery. She was invisible in the way that only someone who understands rooms can be invisible. I waited until after dinner. The dishes were cleared. The remaining guests, about 15 people, including Marcus, his wife Dana, my father, 2 of my father's oldest friends, and several neighbors, were settled in the living room. My father was in his chair, the leather recliner I had bought him for his 70th birthday, positioned under the ceiling fan I had installed. He was expansive. He was generous. He was performing ownership the way he always performed ownership, by sitting in the center of things I had built. I stood up. I said, "Dad, I need to talk to you about the house." He smiled. "What about it, Claire Bear?" I said, "I'm aware of the act of donation transferring the property to Marcus. I'm aware it's scheduled for Monday." The room did not go silent all at once. It went silent in a wave, the people closest to me first, then the ones farther away, like a surveyor's laser sweeping across a field. My father said, "I don't know what you're talking about." That was his first tactic, denial, clean and practiced. He held his coffee cup and did not look at Marcus. I placed the first document on the coffee table, the draft act of donation, Marcus's email to my father, printed. Marcus said, "Where did you get that?" I said, "The household computer." My father said, "This is family business, Claire. Not something to discuss in front of guests." That was his second tactic. Image management, not in front of everyone, not here, in the room I paid for. I placed the second document, the mortgage servicing record, 131 payments, my name, my bank account. "Dad, I have been paying the mortgage on this house for 11 years. The balance is $94,000. The act of donation certifies the property is free and clear. That certification is false." Marcus said, "There's clearly been a miscommunication. Dad told me the mortgage was paid off years ago. This is between you and Dad." That was his third tactic, delivered on behalf, blame shifting. It was between me and my father. Marcus was merely the innocent recipient of a gift he had never questioned, despite holding a business degree and selling things for a living. My father leaned forward. His voice changed. "After everything I've done for this family, after everything I built here, you're going to embarrass me in my own home?" That was his fourth tactic, the loyalty appeal and the ownership claim fused into one sentence. His home, his family, his embarrassment. Renee Trosclair stood up from the dining room chair where she had been sitting quietly for the past 3 hours. Mr. Bellamy, she said, my name is Renee Trosclair. I'm a title attorney in Lafourche Parish. I've reviewed the documents Claire has described. I've also independently confirmed the recorded deed of trust and mortgage. Filing a conveyance with a false lien certification is a criminal matter under Louisiana law. It would also constitute mortgage fraud against the lending institution. I want to make sure everyone in this room understands what is being discussed. My father looked at Renee as though she had materialized from the walls. He looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at the floor. I placed the third document, the unrecorded quitclaim deed. His signature, the notary seal, June 14th, 2013. You signed this 11 years ago, I said. You told the title company you would file it yourself. You never did. You kept my name off the deed of a house I was paying for. And now you were going to give it to Marcus and tell the state of Louisiana that my mortgage doesn't exist. I set the last document down. The full accounting, year by year, every payment, every repair, every tax receipt. The total at the bottom, $237,480. You did not build this house, Dad. You bought a shell for $62,000, and then you let me pour $250,000 into it while you sat in this chair and told people you'd been working on it your whole life. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Claire Bear, I was always going to take care of you, you know that. I said nothing. I was done. The room held the particular silence of 15 people simultaneously understanding something they had chosen not to understand before. Dana, Marcus's wife, was the one I watched most carefully in the days that followed. She had been at the open house. She had seen the documents. She had not spoken during the confrontation. But I had noticed something during the dinner portion of the evening, before I stood up. Dana had been looking at the kitchen, really looking at it, the way you look at something when you are seeing it for the first time despite having seen it a dozen times before. She had touched the edge of the countertop I had chosen and installed. She had opened a cabinet and closed it slowly. A week after the open house, Dana called me. She said, I didn't know about the mortgage. I said, what did you know? She said, I knew Marcus said your dad was giving him the house. I didn't ask why. There was a pause. I should have asked why. 3 weeks later, Dana called again. She said she had found the original act of donation on Marcus's laptop, not the draft, but the version ready for signing. She had looked at the lien certification line. She had looked at the property tax records online. She said, he knew Claire. He pulled the tax records himself. I can see his search history. She sent me screenshots. 2 months later, Dana sat across from me at a coffee shop in Houma and said, I'm sorry I was part of a family that did this to you and never said anything. I should have seen it. I was comfortable not seeing it. I looked at her for a long time. I said, I appreciate you telling me that. I did not say it was okay. It was not okay. It was real, and it was not enough, and both of those things were true simultaneously. The act of donation was never signed. The Baton Rouge attorney withdrew from the engagement after Renee Trosclair contacted him directly regarding the false lien certification. He sent a letter to my father stating that he could not proceed with a conveyance that misrepresented the title status of the property, and that he was obligated to report the circumstances to the Louisiana State Bar's Ethics Council if a complaint was filed. No complaint was filed. The letter was sufficient. I retained my own attorney. The unrecorded quitclaim deed was filed with the Lafourche Parish Clerk of Court on November 19, 2024. It was recorded as instrument number 2024-018734. I became co-owner of 414 Rue Colline, 11 years after I was supposed to. I then filed a petition for partition by licitation, a forced sale of co-owned property under Louisiana law. My father could not maintain the property alone. He had never maintained it alone. He had never paid a property tax bill, never called a roofer, never replaced a water heater. When the petition was served, he called me and said, "You're going to sell my house?" I said, "I'm going to sell our house, and I'm going to collect my share of what I put into it." The property was appraised at $485,000. My documented contributions totaled $237,480. Under the partition, the court recognized my claim for reimbursement of improvements and mortgage payments. After the sale, my father received approximately $114,000. I received approximately $341,000, inclusive of reimbursement and my ownership share. Marcus, who had been promised a $485,000 house for nothing, received nothing. His pharmaceutical sales territory was restructured shortly after. Coincidence, not consequence, but the timing meant he was driving more miles for fewer commissions in a leased car he could no longer comfortably afford. He and Dana separated in February. She told me, in the last conversation we had, that the separation was not about the house, it was about the search history, it was about what Marcus knew and calculated and never said. My father moved into a two-bedroom apartment in Thibodeau. The rent was $1,100 a month. For the first time in his life, no one was paying it for him. I am told he is managing. I do not call. He has not called me. The leather recliner, I heard from a neighbor, went with him. The ceiling fan above it did not. Lily and I moved into a house in Huma, 1,200 square feet. Nothing grand. I bought it with cash from the partition proceeds. The deed is in my name, only my name. I surveyed the property myself before closing, shot every corner, calculated the lot area, confirmed the setbacks, verified the easements. It is mine down to the centimeter. And the thing I had been postponing, the thing that kept getting pushed aside every time the phone rang with another repair, another bill, another silence that meant another check, was Lily's college fund. I had started one when she was born. Every time an emergency appeared at 414 Rue Cologne, I rated it. $4,000 for the septic, $7,000 for the electrical panel, $14,500 for the air conditioning. Her fund was nearly empty by the time she was 8. It is not empty now, it is funded, fully, in her name. With a balance I check every month, not because I am worried, but because checking numbers is what I do when I love something. I think about what people say when they think no one is listening, not the cruelty of it, though it is cruel, but the architecture of it. My father did not say those words in the kitchen because he was angry with me. He said them because, in the version of the world that operated inside his head, I was a resource, not a person. Resources do not need to be consulted. Resources do not have ownership. Resources are allocated. The sentence Claire was never going to amount to anything worth protecting the house for was not an evaluation of my worth. It was a cost-benefit analysis performed by a man who had never once run the numbers on what I had actually contributed, because the numbers would have told him something he could not afford to know. People ask me if I regret hearing it. I do not. What I regret is every month between June 2013 and October 2024, when a signed, notarized deed sat in a drawer and I made a payment on a house I was told I belonged in but was never allowed to own. That is the difference between family and tenancy. One is a relationship. The other is an arrangement where the terms are never written down because writing them down would make them enforceable, and enforceability is the one thing the person holding power cannot permit. Lily is 10 now. Last Saturday, she sat at the kitchen table, our kitchen table, in our house, and asked me what I was working on. I had a plat spread out in front of me, a property survey for a client in Terrebonne Parish. She said, "Can I see?" I turned the plat toward her. She looked at the boundary lines, the bearings, the distances marked in precise black text, and she said, "You draw really straight lines, Mom." I said, "That's the job." She nodded, satisfied, and went back to her cereal. It was 9:22 on a Saturday morning. The coffee was fresh. If the people in your life spoke about you the way my father spoke about me when he believed no one was listening, what would you hear? And more importantly, would you already know? This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, education, and dramatic reflection. We hope it reminded you that your dignity is not negotiable, and that setting a boundary, even a painful one, can be an act of love for yourself and everyone the pattern would have reached next.